Without missing a beat, the bodyguard followed the butler to the counter at the shooting range. Edgar took out his wallet again and pulled out $2 from one of the money compartments, which he placed on the counter. "My friend here would like to shoot 6 times, Edgar said, pointing to the silent security guard next to him. He gave the butler, who was more than a head shorter than him, a condescending look. Because of the sunglasses, Jamie had a hard time reading the tall bodyguard's look, but he thought he was annoyed by Edgar's not entirely serious description of him as a friend. Nevertheless, the bodyguard picked up one of the rifles, which was approved for 6 rounds. He casually picked it up and began pulling the trigger without hesitation. The rubber cartridges shot out of the barrel of the air rifle in quick succession. Each of the 6 shots accurately hit one of the mini spirits, who each lost their upright position due to the force of the impact. Impressed, those passers-by who noticed what was happening stopped at some distance in front of the shooting range. 6 hits. Edgar cheered enthusiastically. Now the 2 children can each choose one of the main prizes. Kathy jumped several times in a row for joy. "The giant teddy," she shouted excitedly. The girl pointed to a teddy bear that was as tall as an adult and therefore towered over her. The gigantic cuddly toy sat a bit away from the other prizes in the far corner of the shooting range. The hooded figure grabbed the giant teddy bear with its long fingers and effortlessly lifted it over the counter where Edgar received it. Laughing, Kathy immediately cuddles up to the oversized teddy bear. Edgar suddenly found the whole thing much less joyful, realizing that he was the one who had to carry this stuffed animal monster all the way to the limousine that was parked on the upper deck of a parking garage. An 8-year-old girl was overwhelmed by this and none of the bodyguards would deign to do it. Before that happened, however, Edgar turned to Jamie, who was standing in front of the shooting range with a broad grin and letting his eyes wander over the displays. "It's your turn to choose a prize," the butler asked the boy. Jamie, knowing exactly which of the grand prizes he wanted, hesitated, as if something deep inside was preventing him from voicing his wish. Finally the boy took courage and pointed to the black box, which he had no idea what was inside. "That little black box there," he said. As soon as Jamie had made his choice, the hooded figure grasped the box with one hand and passed it over the counter to the eagerly looking boy. Jamie hesitantly took it from the gray hand of the man he thought was a disguised showman. Jamie cradled the cube-shaped object, which was heavier than expected, in his hands. It was made of a solid material that felt similar to rock. As Jamie ran his fingers across its 6 pages, he felt that they were slightly uneven. The small box had a kind of lid at the top, but it couldn't be opened by itself. There was a silver button on the right side under the lid. Its activation probably triggered an opening mechanism. Edgar frowned in surprise at Jamie's unusual choice. "What is that supposed to be, a music box?" he asked the boy. Shrugging, Jamie pressed the silver button on the side, which gave way after a little pressure. At the top, the lid of the box popped open, catapulting a jester figure attached to a spring outwards. A quiet giggle sounded from the box. "A jack-in-the-box!" Jamie shouted enthusiastically. "I've always wanted one of these." Edgar wrinkled his nose in disgust at the obscure sight of this most special jack-in-the-box. Jamie's little sister was also anything but impressed by the jester's terrible appearance and buried her face in the plush of the giant teddy bear. "He looks disgusting." "A horror jack-in-the-box," said the butler, referring to the appearance of the figure that had jumped out of the box. Grinning, Jamie looked at the model of a miniature medieval jester. The figure, which was around 15 centimeters tall, had a human shape, but that was all that seemed human about it. Her head was crowned with a red and green striped jester's cap. The rest of the doll's clothing, which appeared to be made of shiny silk, was patterned in checks in the same colors. The jack-in-the-box's grayish face was covered in furrows and scars. His strong chin was pointed and jutted out. The fool's creator had given his eyes, whose pupils were reminiscent of a lurking reptile, blood-red veins. They added to the madness evident in the figure's inhuman eyes. A mouth twisted into a devilish grin, revealing 2 rows of sharp fangs, completed the Jack-in-the-Box's grimace. "Do you really like this thing?" Edgar continued after a while, shaking his head. "For me, this strange Jack-in-the-Box is extremely disturbing and frightening. I'm sure you could exchange it for any other prize." Jamie, who loved horror films and everything to do with them, laughed. "Are you kidding, Edgar?" Jamie replied. "This Jack-in-the-Box is by far the craziest and coolest thing I have ever held in my hands. I wouldn't give it back for any money in the world." "Well, it fits wonderfully into your collection. Still, this guy scares the hell out of me, and it looks like it's not just me." Her sister hasn't looked up from her teddy bear since she saw that thing. In fact, Jamie had a large collection of figurines and models in his room, most of which came from horror, science fiction, or fantasy films. The highlight of this collection so far has been a King Kong action figure climbing a miniature model of New York's Empire State Building. In Jamie's opinion, this unusual Jack-in-the-Box topped the giant gorilla on the high-rise model. "I'm going to put the zombie fool back in his box," Jamie reassured the butler as he interpreted his worried expression. With the fingers of his right hand he pressed the figure and sprang into the box until a click was heard and the lid could be closed again. "Good," Edgar replied. "At least this way you won't scare the hell out of every child on the fairground. You children have your prizes and we should now make our way back as agreed. We have a long drive home ahead of us and your parents will certainly be happy if you are back before dinner." The Gibson children left the fairground together with their butler and bodyguards. On the path lined with stalls and rides, Edgar was the only one who turned back towards the shooting range. His gaze settled on the faceless figure. When he sensed the triumphant stare of a malevolent intelligence in the shadows beneath the low-slung hood, he swallowed so hard his larynx hurt. A cold sweat appeared on his forehead at the feeling that something had just happened that would result in disaster. Carrying the giant teddy bear, he turned around again without mentioning his uneasy feeling. Hoping he was wrong, Edgar followed the Gibsons' happy children. The Gibsons' property was in the middle of the country, a few miles from the nearest town. It was an old castle-like country house with over 20 rooms. The first person to greet Jamie, Kathy and Edgar after their trip was Cherry, the 3-year-old female poodle who had been part of the family for almost as long. Cherry's curly fur, typical of her breed, was snow-white, which gave her a particularly noble appearance. "There's my sweetheart," Jamie said happily as the female poodle ran excitedly around his legs. Of the members of his family, Jamie was the one who loved the dog the most. A love that was returned in a special way. Cherry almost always came running to Jamie first. The boy spent an unusually long time with Cherry for his age. He hardly had any friends his own age and he didn't give nearly as much time to the few acquaintances that Jamie had. In his father's eyes, Jamie was an unusual boy who often behaved very differently than Robert Gibson would have at the same age. On the other hand, Jamie was also a little proud of the differences between himself and his old man, who had already gone into politics as a young man, because he never wanted to be like his father. Jamie would have preferred to go straight to his room to take a closer look at the Jack-in-the-Box, but it was customary for the Gibsons for the family to get together after an outing. Furthermore, it was soon time for dinner, which, with a few exceptions, was always eaten in the dining room at 7 p.m. sharp. So the children first sat down in the Gibsons' large living room, where, in addition to a few valuable paintings, there were also several stuffed hunting trophies hanging on the walls. After a few minutes Robert and Ellen Gibson joined us. Kathy immediately jumped up from the chair she was sitting on and ran into her mother's arms. "Mommy, Mommy," the girl cried happily as Ellen picked her up. "Well, you day trippers," Robert Gibson greeted his children with a smile. "You are back. I hope you two had a nice day." "Yeah," Kathy replied excitedly. "We went on carousels and one of the uncles with the sunglasses won prizes for us at a shooting range." "I know," Ellen replied. She gently stroked her daughter's nose. "You have a huge teddy bear. Edgar just brought him to your room." Robert Gibson turned to his son with interest. "And what did you win, Jamie?" The boy took the black box that was lying next to him and lifted it up. "This little box, Dad," he replied. "What's in there?" "I can't imagine you just picked an empty black box as your main prize." Anticipating what was about to happen, Kathy hugged her mother even tighter and turned her head to the side with a sigh. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Ellen asked, stroking her daughter's blonde hair. There was no answer. Instead, Jamie pressed the silver button on the edge of the box, causing the jack-in-the-box to catapult out. Robert Gibson grimaced in disgust when he saw the spring that had come out of the